Hey guys, tonight we drift into the quiet lanes of a place where the grass sways against your boots and the wooden beams of your small drafty hut groan softly in the evening breeze. This is Medieval Dynasty, and though you've sworn you'll build a thriving village, feed your people, and live out a calm country life, you probably won't survive this. Not because of bandits, nor because of wolves, but because you'll keep making the same mistakes that every new settler makes in this world of damp straw roofs and endlessly hungry villagers. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it where you are? Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The story begins with your first mistake, stepping into the valley, with the sun already tipping westward, without food, without water, and without the faintest plan. You wander for hours, mesmerized by the way sunlight slides between the leaves, until you suddenly notice the light fading into the blue shadow of evening. In reality, medieval peasants would have timed their day with the sun's arc, every action tied to daylight hours. But you, in your new game optimism, have already squandered the most precious resource you have: time. You trudge forward hungry, and there's the second mistake, assuming food will appear simply because the world looks lush and green. In medieval life, every apple, every hunk of bread had an origin you could trace: grown, gathered, baked, bartered. But in Medieval Dynasty, you forget that you start with almost nothing. You push on, telling yourself you'll hunt tomorrow. But tomorrow brings another urgent task: a roof over your head before winter. You can't eat logs and you can't sleep inside a rabbit snare. In the distance, you spot deer grazing. But here comes the third mistake, overestimating your skill with that crude spear. You crouch, you creep, you throw, and the deer bounds away, your spear vanishing with it. Now you're unarmed and hungrier than before. In real medieval villages, hunting wasn't a casual errand. It was a highly skilled trade, often restricted by law. Poaching could cost you a hand or worse. But here, your only penalty is another trip into the forest to carve a fresh stick into yet another ill-balanced spear. As the night descends, you make the fourth mistake, thinking you can push through the dark. You gather sticks and stones, telling yourself you'll craft a torch. But the shadows deepen, and the world loses its detail. In reality, medieval night was a curtain of black, pierced only by starlight and the wavering glow of fire. Without a lamp, you stumble, misjudge a slope, and tumble into the icy shallows of a river you didn't even see. Your boots soak through. Your clothes cling cold to your skin. Shivering, you think you'll just find a tree to lean against until dawn. But that's the fifth mistake, assuming idleness will keep you safe. In medieval times, a wet, motionless body was a slow invitation for sickness. Even a simple chill could spiral into fever, and without herbs, without warmth, without a healer, that was a gamble you might not win. You should be gathering reeds to stuff between your wet socks and your skin-breaking twigs for a small fire. But instead, you watch your breath curl into the night air, waiting for light. Dawn finally comes, gray and reluctant. You set out for better ground, but you make the sixth mistake, carrying too much. Every stick, every stone you pick up adds to your load, and before long you move at the pace of a reluctant mule. In real life, a medieval peasant knew the art of carrying baskets slung over the backpacks, balanced to distribute weight, and above all, the sense to leave behind what was not worth the burden. But here you drag yourself forward, half convinced that every rock might be useful later. When you finally reach a small clearing, you decide this is where your village will rise. The seventh mistake appears quickly placing your first house without considering its orientation. In medieval building practice, you would have studied the path of the sun, the direction of the prevailing winds, the slope of the land for drainage. But you plant your house squarely facing the cold north wind. In winter, the draft will whistle through the gaps in your planks and keep your nights colder than the forest. You get to work chopping trees, and here comes mistake number 8, stripping the forest bare around your site. Medieval woodcutters often worked in rotation cutting selectively so the forest could renew itself. You, however, clear a wide bald patch around your home, leaving yourself exposed to wind and with no trees left for future repairs. The stumps which you haven't removed sprout unevenly, a constant reminder that haste carves scars into the land. By midday, you're thirsty, but you keep working. That's the 9th mistake, neglecting water. A medieval villager would have known every spring and stream within a mile of home, drawing water daily, keeping a jug near the hearth. You though work until dizziness sends you stumbling toward the nearest riverbank, where you gulp down cold water like a desperate animal. Your head clears, but your energy lags. As the day fades again, you remember you haven't eaten since yesterday's futile deer chase. That's the 10th mistake, treating food as an afterthought. In real medieval life, every day revolved around it. You would have baked bread in the morning, set a pot to simmer over the fire, and snared rabbits at the forest edge before breakfast. But here, you hunch by your unfinished hut, chewing on bitter, uncooked berries, telling yourself you'll hunt properly tomorrow. Night falls a second time, and your small fire pops and hisses in the breeze. You curl under your half-built roof, hoping the walls will keep out the cold. But wind slips through the gaps and carries with it the scent of damp earth and far-off rain. In medieval times, a roof wasn't just shelter, it was life insurance. Without thatch thick enough to shed water, without tight seams to block wind, winter would claim even the strongest. You close your eyes and sleep comes slowly, every creak of the wood and rustle of the grass reminding you the valley is patient but not forgiving. Tomorrow will bring new mistakes unless you learn. Morning comes pale and watery, the kind of light that doesn't quite warm you but makes you squint anyway. You sit up in your half-finished hut, feeling the damp stiffness in your joints, and think, all right, today will be different. That's the 11th mistake, believing that determination alone will feed you. In the medieval world, resolve without skill was a short path to ruin. You can tell yourself you'll hunt today, but the forest has no sympathy for intention. You wander to the edge of the trees, where dew beads cling to the long grass like tiny glass drops. You grip your freshly carved spear, the replacement for yesterday's lost one, and step softly among the ferns. There, a rabbit darts across the path. You fling the spear, but it thuds uselessly into the soil a foot away. The rabbit vanishes. That's the 12th mistake, thinking speed is the key to hunting. In truth, patience was the medieval hunter's most treasured tool. Hunters would sit for hours, motionless, blending into their surroundings, until the game wandered close enough for a certain shot. Your restless shifting scares off more animals than you'll ever catch. Frustrated, you decide to try fishing instead. You wade into the shallows, spear poised. Small silver flickers dart beneath the surface, but your first jab sends them scattering. The 13th mistake, underestimating water's trickery. Refraction bends the image. The fish isn't quite where you see it. Medieval fishermen knew this and aimed accordingly, their strikes practiced through years of habit. You, however, stab the water until your arms ache, netting nothing but a soggy tunic and more irritation. Hunger gnaws at you, so you turn to gathering. You pluck mushrooms, brown, white, unfamiliar. You sniff them, shrug, and slip them into your pouch. That's the 14th mistake, assuming nature offers safe gifts. In real medieval villages, the knowledge of which plants nourished and which killed was passed carefully from parent to child. The wrong mushroom could bring convulsions before sunset. You don't die this time. Medieval Dynasty is kinder than history, but your stomach knots painfully and your energy drops. You stagger back to your hut, thinking you'll just rest a moment. But that's the 15th mistake, treating your shelter as a passive refuge. In the medieval world, a home demanded constant tending. Thatched roofs sagged without tightening mud, and wattle walls crumbled without patching, and hearth fires died if left unwatched. You collapse onto your straw pile, and by the time you wake, the sun has tilted west again. Another day nearly gone. Determined to salvage it, you decide to work on your roof. You haul reeds from the riverbank, tying bundles clumsily. The 16th mistake, neglecting knotcraft. Medieval builders tied thatch with intricate patterns to hold against storms, each knot positioned for strength. You lash yours any which way, the reeds slipping loose even before you lift them into place. A gust of wind will undo all of this in minutes. The light fades, but you press on your eyes, straining in the dim. That's the 17th mistake, working past visibility. Without daylight, every blow of your hammer misses slightly, every cut strains your wrist. Medieval craftsmen rose with the dawn and stopped when the sun fell, not out of laziness, but because the body worked better in harmony with the day. You keep going, and by nightfall your hands throb with dull pain. The next morning, your first instinct is to check your traps, if you remember them at all. Yesterday's frustration distracted you, and you haven't even built any. The 18th mistake, assuming hunting alone will feed you. In medieval villages, trapping was a constant, quiet companion to farming and fishing. Snares near burrows, pits along game paths, small work that yielded steady results. You've put all your hopes into a single method, and it keeps failing. By midday, you've had enough of hunger's slow bite. You head for a berry patch, stripping it bare. That's the 19th mistake, taking without thinking ahead. In the real medieval countryside, overharvesting was a slow disaster. Berries left on the bush, fed birds, spread seeds, and promised next year's crop. You and your short-sightedness leave nothing behind. When you return in a few days, there will be nothing waiting. You finally decide to trade. You carry a bundle of sticks to the nearest village, expecting what? Silver coins, bread. The 20th mistake, overestimating the value of raw effort. In medieval markets, currency was trust. A stranger with sticks was worth little. It was goods transformed by skill, woven baskets, carved handles, smoked meat that carried weight. The stall-keeper eyes your sticks and offers a handful of coins, barely enough to buy a crust of bread. You trudge home, chewing that bread, slowly making it last. On the way, you realize your water skin is empty. You could drink from the river, but you pass a stagnant pool and think, close enough. That's the 21st mistake, ignoring water's health. In real medieval life, bad water meant dysentery, fever, or worse. People learned to drink from running springs, or they boiled their water when possible. You gulp from the pool, and by evening your belly twists again. Night finds you staring into the fire. Sparks drift upward like tiny red spirits. You think about tomorrow, about how much there still is to do. And here's the 22nd mistake, thinking you can do it all alone. Medieval life was communal by necessity. Neighbors worked side by side, traded favors, shared tools. Alone, you face every hunger, every cold night, every injury with no help. The valley will wear you down faster than you can build yourself up. You bank the fire and curl under your half-roof. Rain begins soft at first, then insistent. Droplets slip through your reed bundles and plink onto your brow. You close your eyes, but sleep comes only in fragments. You dream of empty snares, spoiled berries, and the silent, watchful forest pressing closer to your little clearing. Tomorrow, you promise yourself, you'll be wiser. But wisdom comes slowly here, slower than hunger, slower than weather, slower than the mistakes that keep finding you. The rain has stopped by the time you open your eyes, though the air still tastes of wet earth and smoke. The sky is a sheet of pale gray, and the grass bows heavy with water. You push yourself upright and hear the sound of dripping from your roof, which has sagged slightly in the night. You poke at the reeds and watch a small stream find its way down your sleeve. That's the 23rd mistake, thinking you can leave a half-finished job to the mercy of weather. In the medieval world, roofs were repaired at the first hint of damage because a slow leak could rot the beams before the season turned. You've let yours sit overnight, and now the damp is setting into the frame. You head for the forest with axe in hand, hoping to find a straight trunk for replacement beams. Soon you spot a tall spruce leaning just enough to make it tempting. You swing, chips fly, and the tree groans. Then comes the 24th mistake, felling trees without planning the fall. Medieval woodcutters knew to clear the ground to angle the cut to guide the trunk's fall away from their feet. You, however, watch in alarm as the spruce crashes into the edge of your firewood pile, splintering it into a messy heap. You drag the logs back, your arms burning with effort. That's the 25th mistake, exhausting yourself before the real work even begins. In medieval farming and building, pacing was survival. You'd work a little rest, a little balancing your energy across the day. But here, you burn through your strength before breakfast, and by the time you lift the first log toward the roof, your shoulders feel like stones. Back inside your hut, you notice something else. The floor is damp again, not just from leaks, but from the earth itself. That's the 26th mistake, ignoring the ground beneath you. In real medieval homes, even the simplest had raised floors, or at least layers of straw renewed often, to keep feet dry and spirits warm. You've laid nothing down, and every step squelches faintly. Determined to fix something today, you decide to hunt again, this time for larger game. You craft a bow, rough, awkward in the hand, and head for the hills. You see a boar rooting at the edge of the clearing. You draw loose and miss by a hand's breadth. The boar turns, snorts, and charges. That's the 27th mistake, forgetting that some prey fights back. Medieval hunters approached boar with spears braced against the ground, a partner at their side and a quick escape path in mind. You have none of these, and the boar's tusk catches your leg as you dive aside. Limping, you retreat to the stream to wash the wound. The cold water numbs it. But here's the 28th mistake, treating injury as a pause instead of a turning point. In medieval times, a gash like this could mean weeks of slowed work, a risk of infection, and a need for careful binding and herbs. You rinse it, wrap it poorly, and hobble back home thinking you'll just work slower. By midday, you're trying to gather reeds again. You bend low, pulling at the stems, but in your haste you rip them at uneven lengths. That's the 29th mistake, caring only for quantity. Medieval thatchers prized uniformity because it made bundles tighter, roofs smoother, and leaks fewer. Your mismatched reeds will knot poorly and slip in the wind. You finally eat a handful of berries you'd hidden away and nearly forgotten. They take the edge off hunger, but do little for strength. That's the 30th mistake, thinking you can run on scraps. Medieval meals were planned to sustain long hours of work bread, for energy broth, for warmth meat when fortune allowed. You've given yourself nothing but a brief reprieve from the ache in your stomach. Feeling tired but stubborn, you decide to explore further downstream. You find a clearing with wild herbs, though you can't name them. You pick some anyway, thinking they might be useful later. That's the 31st mistake, collecting without knowledge. In the medieval world, herbal lore was a living map in the mind. Which leaf cooled fever, which root soothed a wound, which flower carried hidden poison. You toss the herbs into your pouch and forget about them until they wilt into uselessness. When you return, the fire has gone out. You crouch to rekindle it, but your damp kindling resists. That's the 32nd mistake, relying on luck instead of preparation. A medieval hearth was rarely allowed to go cold. A small ember banked under ash could be coaxed into flame with ease. You spend half an hour blowing weakly on reluctant twigs, your cheeks hot, your patience thin. At last the fire catches and you sit watching it, knowing you've once again let a day slip by. You think perhaps tomorrow you'll build a fence to keep out wandering animals. You start to measure space in your mind, pacing the yard. Then comes the 33rd mistake, planning without materials. In the medieval world, no one began a fence until the posts were cut, the tools sharpened, and the work parties arranged. You're only dreaming of straight lines and tidy corners, but you have nothing ready. Evening brings a pale orange light that makes the damp grass glow faintly. You feel a restlessness. You want to do something before night. You decide to wander toward the hills again, maybe to scout for better hunting grounds. That's the 34th mistake, venturing far with daylight fading. Medieval travelers knew to start early to be back before sunset, unless they had camp gear and company. Alone, you wander further than you think, and the sun dips behind the trees before you turn back. Darkness catches you mid-path, and the forest shifts. Shapes loom closer, sounds sharpen, and you realize your torch is back at the hut. That's the 35th mistake, forgetting light in a land where night owns the hours. In medieval villages, even a short walk home from the fields could be treacherous without a lantern. You hurry, tripping over roots, your breath loud in your ears. When you reach your hut, you throw yourself inside and drop onto the straw. You think about how every mistake you've made today has been small in the moment, but each has added to the slow erosion of your strength and safety. This is the truth of life in the valley, and of medieval survival. Failure rarely shouts. It whispers until you can no longer stand. The fire crackles. Rain patters faintly again on the reed roof. You pull your blanket close and let your eyes close. In your dreams, the forest stands taller, the river runs colder, and the valley waits patient and watchful. Morning is late in coming, as if the valley itself has decided to sleep in. When you finally stir, the air inside your hut feels heavier, damp with last night's rain. You step outside and see that the ground has turned to soft mud around your doorway. That's the 36th mistake, ignoring drainage. In medieval life, people knew better than to let the earth around a home turn to soup. They dug shallow channels, laid stones, or built raised walkways to keep the entrance dry. You, however, now step ankle-deep into muck before you've even rubbed the sleep from your eyes. The mud clings to your boots, weighing each step as you head for the stream to wash them. You think perhaps you'll check the water level. It's higher than yesterday, rushing faster from the hills. That's the 37th mistake, turning your back on a river in flood season. Medieval villagers treated swollen streams with deep caution, knowing how quickly a misstep could pull someone under. You bend to rinse your boots and nearly lose your balance as the current tugs at your ankles. Shaking off the near miss, you decide to forage before breakfast. You wander into the meadow and spot wildflowers, their yellow faces open to the pale sun. You think they'll make the hut cheerier, so you pick a bundle. That's the 38th mistake, using time for beauty when you're still in survival debt. Medieval homes had charms and herbs hanging from the rafters, yes, but only after the larder was full, the woodpile stacked, and the roof mended. You meanwhile still have leaks above your head and no bread in your belly. Hunger pushes you to finally check your traps or the absence of them. You tell yourself you'll build a few now while the day is young. You carve stakes, set loops, and scatter them carelessly along the forest edge. That's the 39th mistake, placing traps where they please you, not where the animals run. Medieval trappers read the ground like a book, narrow paths through the undergrowth worn by hooves or paws, faint droppings marking the way. You'll return tomorrow to find your snares untouched, a little sagging in the dew. Your empty stomach drives you back to the idea of fishing. You carve a crude rod, fashion a line from twisted fibers, and improvise a hook from bent wire. You drop your baitless hook into the water and wait. That's the 40th mistake, thinking fish leap willingly to the unprepared. In medieval fishing, bait was chosen carefully, worms dug at dawn, insects caught in the meadows, bread soaked in ale. You sit on the bank for an hour and catch only the glint of passing scales. Frustration makes you stand, and your eyes wander upriver, where the trees part just enough to suggest a clearing. You decide to explore, leaving your rod propped against a rock. That's the 41st mistake, abandoning your tools where you work. In a medieval setting, gear was guarded like treasure. A misplaced tool was as much a loss as a stolen one. By the time you return, the current has tugged your rod into deeper water, gone beyond reach. You trudge back toward the hut with nothing but the sound of crows above. You notice your woodpile has slumped, last night's rain has soaked through. That's the 42nd mistake, storing wood without cover. Medieval folk kept their logs under overhangs, lean-tos, or inside sheds, ensuring the heartwood stayed dry. You stack your wet logs again, but they'll hiss and smoke before they give you real heat. The cold gnaws at your patience, so you decide to work on the interior of your hut. You think perhaps a small table will make things feel more like home. You saw and hammer, but your cuts are jagged, your boards uneven. That's the 43rd mistake, building without templates or measures. Medieval carpenters followed patterns handed down for generations, knowing that even a humble table could be a lifetime companion. Yours wobbles before you even set it upright. Midday finds you trying again for food. You recall seeing deer further uphill, so you climb into the high meadow. The sun is bright here, and the grass ripples in the breeze. You spot them at last, 3 does grazing near the tree line. You knock an arrow draw, and a sudden gust sends it wide. The deer vanish like smoke. That's the 44th mistake, ignoring the wind. Medieval hunters read the wind constantly, knowing it carried both scent and shot. You've given yourself away before you even loosed the string. You descend weary and remember you've yet to fetch clean water. You fill your skin from the stream and sip as you walk. The cool refreshment makes you slow your pace, and soon you're strolling through the meadow, watching bees bounce from flower to flower. That's the 45th mistake, drifting when the workday is still yours. In medieval times, idle moments were snatched in the evening, or during holy days not scattered through the hours when the sun could still power the body's labor. By the time you return, the shadows are already leaning eastward. You think perhaps you can finish thatch work before dark. You fetch the reed bundles you tied yesterday, only to find they've slipped apart where your knots loosened in the rain. That's the 46th mistake using weak bindings in wet weather. Medieval knot tying took into account how rope swelled, shrank, and shifted when damp. You'll need to start from scratch, costing you another day. The wind rises toward evening, rattling your loose thatch and making the walls groan. You pull your cloak tighter, thinking of a fire, but your wet wood resists every spark. You keep striking flint until your fingers ache. That's the 47th mistake, depending on last-minute solutions. In the medieval rhythm, fires were banked before bent tools, sharpened before the harvest shelters, patched before the storm. You've arrived too late for comfort. Finally, a reluctant flame catches. You hunch near it, soaking in the small warmth. Your mind drifts to the coming winter, and the reality you've yet to face without stores, without sturdy shelter. You will be at the mercy of the cold. That's the 48th mistake, thinking survival can be improvised indefinitely. Medieval peasants lived by cycles, seed time, growth, harvest, store. Without them, the year itself would turn against you. Night falls again, and you lay down on the straw, the faint smell of damp reeds in your nose. You listen to the wind press against the walls and the stream murmur in the distance. In the dark, the valley feels both endless and close, like a story you're only beginning to understand. Sleep comes softly, wrapping you in a silence so deep you can almost hear the slow breathing of the land itself. When you wake, the fire is a gray mound of ash, and the air in the hut is cold enough that your breath hangs briefly before fading. You push yourself up slowly, the joints in your legs stiff from the chill. Outside, a light frost powders the grass, turning the meadow into a pale, glittering sheet. That's the 49th mistake, thinking frost is just a pretty morning view. In medieval life, frost meant a shift in priorities, digging root vegetables before they froze, covering wells, bringing animals closer to shelter. You, however, stand there admiring it until the cold begins to bite through your boots. Your plan is to fetch more reeds for the roof, but the sight of frost-rimmed bushes sends you chasing after the idea of berries instead. You push into the thicket, hands numb from the cold, only to find that most have turned bitter or shriveled overnight. That's the 50th mistake, waiting too long for a harvest. Medieval gatherers watched the seasons like hawks. One missed week could turn plenty into scarcity. You pop a few sour berries into your mouth anyway, wincing at the taste. Heading for the river, you notice faint hoof prints in the mud. Excited, you follow them deeper into the trees. But this is the 51st mistake, tracking without readiness. Medieval hunters would set out with prepared weapons, ample time, and sometimes even a partner to help drive the game toward them. You have none of these. The tracks lead you in wide loops before fading into the carpet of pine needles, leaving you with nothing but colder fingers. By the time you return to your hut, your stomach gnaws again. You decide to boil water for broth, but realize you have no broth, no meat, not even herbs you trust. That's the 52nd mistake, keeping no emergency stores. In medieval homes, a pot was rarely truly empty. Even in lean times, some dried peas, onions, or scraps of smoked meat sat ready for the day when hunting failed. You fill your cup with plain hot water and pretend it's enough. With the frost melting into slick mud, you think about cutting more trees. You take your axe to a cluster just uphill from the hut. You swing and fell one easily enough, but here comes the 53rd mistake, clearing the wrong land. In medieval times, cutting too close to your home risked erosion. Roots held the soil in place, shielding the hut from washouts. You'll only notice the problem when the next heavy rain sends rivulets of mud creeping toward your doorstep. You drag the wood back, breath steaming in the cool air, and start splitting it. The repetitive strikes warm you a little, but your axe handle is beginning to loosen. That's the 54th mistake, neglecting tool care. In a medieval household, tools were inspected constantly. Handles, re-wedged blades kept keen with stone. You're only reminded of your own neglect when the axe head wobbles mid-swing and nearly flies free. Deciding you've had enough of chopping for now, you wander toward the village again, thinking perhaps to barter. You carry a small bundle of firewood on your back, convinced it will fetch something decent. But the trader's face says otherwise. That's the 55th mistake, misjudging market needs. Medieval markets ebbed and flowed with the season. Firewood was dear in late winter, common in autumn. You've brought yours when every villager has their own stack. The trader offers a few coins out of pity. Frustrated, you buy a small loaf of bread and clutch it like treasure on the walk home. The crust is hard, the crumb dense, but it's the best you've tasted in days. You eat it slowly, leaning against your hut wall. The warmth in your belly stirs the thought that maybe today you should finally repair the roof properly. You haul your reed bundles and climb up. But this is the 56th mistake, working without securing yourself. Medieval builders tied themselves or had others steady them. One slip and you're half sliding, half falling into the mud, below breath knocked out of you. Shaken, you retreat indoors, deciding perhaps you'll tend the interior instead. You sweep the floor with a crude broom, pushing damp straw aside to reveal patches of bare, muddy earth. That's the 57th mistake, letting the floor stay bare too long. In medieval homes, fresh straw was laid often, both for warmth and for cleanliness. You've been sleeping on the same flattened layer for days, breathing in the must of mildew. You tell yourself you'll fix it tomorrow. For now, maybe fishing again will calm you. You craft another rod, this time with a bent pin for a hook, and head to the stream. You sit for a long time watching the water swirl and glint. At last you feel a tug, your heart leaps, but the line snaps almost instantly. That's the 58th mistake, using untested cord. Medieval fishers twisted and treated their lines for strength, sometimes even braiding multiple strands. You've made yours from whatever fibers were at hand, and it's cost you the first bite in days. The sun slips lower, turning the river to a ribbon of gold. You decide to head back, but your path takes you past the meadow, where frost still lingers in shadow. You pause to watch it melt, forgetting the fire you meant to light before dark. That's the 59th mistake, letting beauty distract from preparation. In the medieval year, even beauty had its place, festivals, holy days, moments carved from a season of labor. You're stealing time from tomorrow's comfort. By the time you reach the hut, the last light is fading. You rush to strike flint, but the air inside is already chill. Your wet logs hiss, your fingers tremble, and the flame you coax to life is small and reluctant. You hunch over it anyway, absorbing whatever heat it offers. That's the 60th mistake, assuming every day ends in warmth. In the medieval world, cold nights could slip into the bones and linger for days, slowing work, dulling thought, breeding sickness. As you lie down, the frost outside returns under the stars. The valley rests quiet except for the faint crackle of your struggling fire. You breathe slowly, watching the rafters fade into darkness. Somewhere in the trees, a lone owl calls a reminder that the night belongs to other hunters, and the land keeps its own counsel. The fire has gone out again. Only a faint curl of smoke drifts from the ashes, and the cold has settled into the hut like an uninvited guest. Your breath clouds the air, and the damp in the walls feels closer than ever. You push yourself upright and pull on your boots, which are still stiff from yesterday's frost. That's the 61st mistake, failing to dry clothing properly overnight. In medieval times, boots and cloaks were hung near the hearth, rotated, so the heat reached every seam. Wet leather could stiffen and crack, leaving feet vulnerable to the cold. You instead slip your toes into clammy boots and grit your teeth. You decide to fetch water first, thinking it will clear your head. The stream is glassy and cold, the banks glazed with ice in places. You fill your skin, but this is the 62nd mistake, neglecting to warm drinking water in the cold season. Medieval folk knew that cold water on an empty stomach could chill the body further, slowing digestion and sapping energy. You gulp it down anyway, and the shiver that follows lingers in your bones. Hunger pushes you toward the forest. You mean to check the snares you set earlier in the week, though you've not held much hope for them. You find them empty loops, slack and glistening with frost. That's the 63rd mistake, failing to maintain traps. In the medieval rhythm, snares were inspected daily, repositioned, camouflaged anew. You've left yours untended too long, and the forest has simply ignored them. Frustrated, you decide to hunt instead. You follow a narrow trail into the deeper woods where the ground is littered with dry leaves. Ahead, you spot movement, a fox nosing among the roots. You raise your bow, draw, and release too soon. The arrow skitters off a rock, and the fox is gone in a blink. That's the 64th mistake, shooting before your aim steadies. Medieval hunters knew to wait for the still moment between breaths, letting the body quiet before the strings sang. You've let impatience rob you again. By midday, your stomach twists in protest. You remember the mushrooms you gathered some days ago, now shriveled and dark in your pouch. You hesitate, then toss them into the fire. That's the 65th mistake, gathering more than you can use. In medieval life, food was preserved the same day it was taken, dried over embers hung in cool lofts, pickled in brine. Letting it sit was letting it spoil. You wander back to the river in search of fish. You sharpen a spear and stand in the shallows, watching for silver movement. You wait longer this time, steadying your breath. At last you thrust and miss by inches. Again. That's the 66th mistake, trusting in repetition without adjusting technique. Medieval fishermen learned from each failed strike, shifting stance, changing angle, anticipating movement. You just try the same thing harder, wearing yourself out. Cold and wet, you retreat to your hut. The roof still sags where your last repair failed. You tell yourself you'll get to it when the weather clears. That's the 67th mistake, delaying repairs in bad weather. Medieval roofs were patched the moment damage appeared because storms never waited for convenience. The damp in your walls deepens, and the scent of mildew is already curling into the air. You think perhaps you'll make tools instead, something to feel productive indoors. You try to carve a spoon from a rough branch, but your knife is dull. That's the 68th mistake, working without sharpening first. In medieval workshops, the first act of the day was the whetstone's song against steel. You press harder instead, your cuts uneven, your fingers aching, until you set the knife down in defeat. Restless, you decide to walk to the nearest village again, hoping for trade. You take with you a bundle of firewood and the lopsided spoon you've just made. The trader takes the spoon in hand, eyes it, and sets it down without a word. That's the 69th mistake bringing poor work to market. Medieval craftspeople guarded their reputations fiercely. One badly made piece could mark them as careless. You return home with your bundle still on your back. The walk has eaten most of the daylight. You decide to check your woodpile again. The top layer is damp from last night's drizzle, and the logs beneath smell faintly of rot. That's the 70th mistake stacking wood directly on the ground. Medieval woodpiles were lifted on stones or rails, letting air move beneath and rain run off. You've trapped the damp instead. You start a small fire anyway, crouching low to coax it along. The warmth seeps into your hands, making them tingle. You think of cooking something, anything, but the cupboard is bare. That's the 71st mistake, waiting until hunger to plan meals. In medieval homes, tomorrow's meals began the night before, dough rising in covered bowls, stew bones soaking in water. You've left the planning to the wind. Evening falls, and the wind rises. It threads through the gaps in your wall, finding your neck no matter how you sit. You pull your cloak tighter and stare into the fire's heart. That's the 72nd mistake, accepting discomfort as unchangeable. Medieval households fought drafts with woven mats, animal skins, layered fabrics hung against the cold. You tell yourself you'll manage until spring. When darkness is complete, you hear the forest outside, branches creaking, an occasional rustle in the undergrowth. You bank the fire and lay down the straw beneath you, flat and damp in places. That's the 73rd mistake, never refreshing bedding. In the medieval cycle, straw was replaced regularly, sometimes monthly, to keep pests at bay and the bed warm. You shift uncomfortably, pulling the blanket close. Your eyes close slowly, the crackle of the fire fading to memory. In your dreams, the valley is always just beyond your grasp. Food always a little too far, shelter, always a little too thin, warmth, always just out of reach. And in the morning, you know the mistakes will be waiting for you again, patient as ever. Morning light filters in like a faded cloth, pale and thin. You wake stiff, a dull ache in your back from the uneven straw. When you push yourself upright, your breath curls faintly in the cool air. Outside, the grass is slick with dew, and the sky holds the faint blush of sunrise. You stretch, telling yourself today you'll turn things around. That's the 74th mistake, thinking resolve alone will undo neglect. In medieval life, yesterday's failures clung like burrs. They had to be shaken off with deliberate early action, not simply wished away over morning air. You decide to head for the river before breakfast. The water is running low and clear now, but you scoop it up without checking upstream. That's the 75th mistake, ignoring what feeds your water source. Medieval villagers knew their springs and streams intimately, tracing them back to make sure no dead animal, no tannery waste, no stagnant pool tainted the flow. You drink hoping for freshness, but there's a faint mineral tang you can't quite place. Hunger nags already, so you set off toward the berry thickets. You find a few lingering fruits, frost-burned at the edges, and pop them into your mouth. That's the 76th mistake, relying on a dying season for sustenance. Medieval gatherers shifted focus quickly when berries waned, turning to nuts, roots, and stored grains. You're still chasing the tail of summer, hoping for sweetness that's nearly gone. The morning feels warmer than yesterday, so you decide to try fishing again. You cut a new spear and stand in the shallows, waiting. You remind yourself to account for refraction this time, but impatience wins, and you thrust too soon. The fish dart away, leaving ripples in their wake. That's the 77th mistake, letting the mind dictate speed instead of the body's calm. Medieval fishers understood the quiet marriage of breath, stillness, and strike. You've only mastered frustration. You retreat to the bank and sit for a while, sun warming your shoulders. Across the water, you spot a faint path leading into the woods. Curiosity tugs at you, and you cross, following it uphill. That's the 78th mistake, wandering without purpose. Medieval travel was purposeful. Every journey weighed against time's safety and what could be carried back. You climb until the path vanishes, leaving you in a tangle of underbrush far from your work. By the time you return, the sun is well past its peak. You decide to repair the sagging wall of your hut. You pull away the damp planks and see where mold has crept in, dark and spreading. That's the 79th mistake, waiting for rot to show before acting. In medieval homes, the smallest hint of damp was addressed before it found roots in the wood. Now the damage is deep, and your repairs will take twice the effort. You fetch fresh timber, but your saw is dull. You push through anyway, each cut slow and ragged. That's the 80th mistake, forcing a tool beyond its readiness. Medieval craftsmen paused to maintain their blades before starting, knowing the work would cost more in energy than in time if they didn't. Your shoulders ache long before the boards are ready. You fit the new planks as best you can and stand back squinting. They lean slightly, but you tell yourself it will hold. That's the 81st mistake, accepting good enough in structure. In medieval life, crooked meant weak, and weak meant vulnerable. Winter winds will find those seams. Feeling worn, you think of an easier task, gathering herbs from the meadow. You find clusters of green near the stream and pick handfuls without much thought. That's the 82nd mistake, taking without sorting. Medieval herbalists handled each plant with intention, separating useful leaves from dangerous lookalikes. Your bundle is a confused tangle that may be more hazard than help. Back at the hut, you think of cooking them into a stew, but you have no meat, no grain, just bitter greens. You decide instead to dry them for later. You hang them near the fire, but too close. That's the 83rd mistake, drying herbs in too much heat. In medieval kitchens, herbs were strung in cool, airy places, their oils preserved by gentler warmth. Yours crisp and crumble into tastelessness by evening. The sun dips, and you remember you've yet to check the snares again. You find one sagged to the ground, the rope frayed where some animal struggled free. That's the 84th mistake, using weak cordage for traps. Medieval trappers twisted tough fibers from nettle hemp or rawhide, replacing them at the first sign of wear. You'll need to start over entirely. With the last of the light, you gather sticks for the night's fire. You take them from the edge of the forest, where fallen wood lies damp and moss-covered. That's the 85th mistake, burning green wood. Medieval households knew that only seasoned, dry logs gave steady heat. Green wood smoked, hissed, and gave little warmth. Your hut will smell of damp smoke all evening. Back inside, you strike flint and coax a small flame into being. You sit near it, cloak wrapped tight, and listen to the wind moving through the trees outside. You think of tomorrow, of how much still needs doing, and how little you seem to finish each day. That's the 86th mistake, thinking tomorrow has more hours than today. Medieval laborers used every available moment of daylight, knowing no day could be reclaimed once spent. Night falls fully, and the fire settles into embers. You lie down, the straw crackling faintly beneath you. Your muscles hum with a mix of work and cold. Outside, the forest speaks in soft creaks and distant calls. Somewhere far off, water moves over stone. You close your eyes, the valley pressing gently around you, holding both your failures and the fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, you'll get it right tomorrow. The morning greets you with a thin mist that clings low to the meadow, curling around your legs as you step outside. The air feels heavy damp in a way that seeps into your skin. You stand for a moment, breathing it in, and think you might take a slow start today. That's the 87th mistake, mistaking stillness for rest, when survival still demands movement. In medieval life, quiet mornings were used to their fullest, baking bread before dawn, mending nets, tending fires. You stand watching the mist until the sun begins to thin it, and another hour has slipped away. You decide to head for the forest, to check your snares again. The dew soaks through your boots in minutes, chilling your feet. That's the 88th mistake, failing to waterproof clothing. Medieval folk greased their boots with animal fat or beeswax, sealing the leather against damp. You've made no such effort, and each step squeezes cold water between your toes. At the first snare, you find the loop sprung, the bait gone. The second is buried under leaves, as if the forest is reclaiming your intrusion. That's the 89th mistake, placing traps without clearing and maintaining the area. Medieval trappers cleared just enough to keep traps functional, brushing away fallen leaves daily so prey paths stayed visible. Your traps now blend into the forest as nothing more than useless twine. You press on deeper, hoping for better luck. At the third snare, you finally see a rabbit, dead limp in the loop. Relief warms you, but only briefly. That's the 90th mistake, celebrating before securing. Medieval hunters dispatched and collected their catch, quickly aware that predators or scavengers could appear at any moment. You stand there grinning until the rustle of wings draws your gaze to a crow already eyeing the prize. You hurry back toward the hut, rabbit in hand. Along the way, you stop at the stream to wash it. The water clouds red, and you think it's cleaner now. That's the 91st mistake, washing game without proper preparation. In medieval kitchens, carcasses were dressed and bled in specific places. The meat hung to cool in shaded air. You've only rinsed the surface, leaving the real work undone. Back home, you try to cook it immediately. You skin it in ragged strips, nicking the meat more than once. That's the 92nd mistake, working with a dull knife again. In the medieval kitchen, sharpness was essential not only for efficiency, but for preserving more of the meat. You waste enough in clumsy cuts to make a poor stew poorer still. You set the pot over the fire, but you've used too much wood, and the heat scorches the bottom. That's the 93rd mistake, thinking more fire means faster cooking. Medieval cooks understood that food needed steady, even heat, often shifting pots to the fire's edge for a slow simmer. Your stew bubbles too hard, turning the meat tough. Still, you eat gratefully, the warmth filling you from the inside. You sit back thinking maybe the day has turned for the better. But then you remember the roof again. The damp patch in the corner has grown, the reed bundles above sagging. That's the 94th mistake, tolerating recurring problems. In medieval life, a repair ignored was a repair multiplied. The longer you waited, the larger the damage became. You fetch your ladder and climb, balancing awkwardly as you try to shift the reed bundles into place. Your foot slips on the damp rung, and you catch yourself at the last moment. That's the 95th mistake, climbing without securing your footing. Medieval builders laid planks across beams, tied ladders, and often worked in pairs to steady them. Alone, you teeter above the ground, with only luck keeping you from a hard fall. By midday, the sun has burned away the mist, and the forest hums with insects. You decide to gather wood, wandering far for dry branches. You find a fallen tree and begin sawing through it, but the blade binds and sticks. That's the 96th mistake, cutting without clearing tension in the wood. Medieval woodcutters read the grain and relieved the pressure before sawing fully through. You wrench the blade free with a muttered curse and start again, slower this time. You haul the logs back in small armfuls, your pace slow under the weight. Halfway, you decide to leave some behind to collect later. That's the 97th mistake, splitting effort over multiple trips without marking your path. Medieval gatherers left visible signs, knots in branches, stacked stones to find their way back quickly. You set your pile down in a spot that will look like every other part of the forest when you return. Back at the hut, you store the wood under the same open lean-to you've been using. That's the 98th mistake, repeating bad storage habits without change. In medieval yards, seasoned wood had its own careful arrangement. Oldest pieces near the top for quick use, new wood stacked for later seasons. Your heap remains a haphazard monument to wasted work. Evening approaches and you feel the pull to rest. But the rabbit bones from earlier sit in a heap, drawing flies. That's the 99th mistake, leaving refuse in the open. Medieval homes kept waste far from living spaces to avoid pests and sickness, often burying or burning scraps immediately. You kick the bones aside, telling yourself you'll deal with them tomorrow. As the sun dips, you light the fire again, this time more carefully. The warmth spreads slowly, and you sit watching the flames lick the edges of the logs. Outside, the forest deepens into shadow, and the air cools. That's the 100th mistake, believing the day is done when the sun sets. Medieval evenings were still full of work, mending clothes, sharpening tools, preparing for the next dawn. You instead sit until the fire is the only thing moving in the hut. You stretch out on your straw, listening to the crackle fade. The night wraps around the hut like a dark cloak, and in that quiet you feel the valley's patience again. It waits, as it always does, for you to either learn or fail slowly in all the small ways that make no sound until it's too late. The morning comes clear and sharp, the kind of air that feels like it's been rinsed overnight. The frost is gone for now, replaced by a brittle brightness that makes every sound seem a little louder. You push open the door and step outside, blinking against the pale sun. The meadow is still wet from yesterday's mist, each blade of grass beaded with water. You think it's a good day to wander to see what the valley offers. That's the 101st mistake, beginning the day without a plan. Medieval villagers woke with the day's work already mapped in their heads. Wandering without purpose meant work left undone, and undone work meant leaner seasons. You follow the track toward the village, telling yourself you might trade. You carry nothing of particular value, just a few sticks and a bundle of damp herbs. That's the 102nd mistake, bringing goods without preparing them for market. Medieval sellers cleaned, bundled, and presented their wares to show worth. You arrive with a handful of twigs and weeds that look like the leavings of a ditch. The trader eyes your goods, shakes their head, and waves you off. You linger in the village a while, chatting with a few others. That's the 103rd mistake, spending social time during peak daylight. Medieval work rhythms kept conversations for evenings or market days. The sun was for labor. You stand laughing at a story while the hours slip by. By midday, you start back toward your hut. On the way, you pass a patch of wild onions. You pull a few, tossing them into your pouch. That's the 104th mistake, harvesting without checking the soil. Medieval gatherers knew to dig carefully, removing roots whole so the plant could regrow. You snap them off hastily, leaving scraps that will rot instead of renew. When you reach the hut, you remember the wood pile is low again. You head into the forest, this time determined to bring back more. You spot a tall, straight tree and begin chopping the rhythm steady. But as the trunk starts to lean, it catches on a neighboring tree. That's the 105th mistake, felling without clearing a fall path. Medieval woodcutters looked for lean wind and clearance before the first strike. Now you have a half-fallen tree hanging overhead like a trap. You hack at it from another angle until it finally drops, but the force splinters one end badly. That's the 106th mistake, damaging the material in harvest. Medieval workers aimed to preserve the quality of every log. Waste meant lost heat, lost building strength. You'll burn these splintered pieces quickly, but they won't last the winter. Hauling the logs back is slow, and your shoulders ache before you reach the hut. You decide to leave some by the path to fetch later, marking the spot with a stick. That's the 107th mistake, using marks too subtle to stand out. Medieval foresters carved distinct blazes in bark or stacked visible stones. Your stick will look like any other fallen branch when you return. Back at the hut, you stack the wood directly against the wall for convenience. That's the 108th mistake, inviting pests inside. In medieval homes, firewood was stored a short distance away, both to avoid insects creeping indoors and to keep damp from wicking into the wall timbers. Soon enough, you'll find small beetles exploring your floor. You think about lunch and remember the wild onions. You toss them into a pot with water and a pinch of dried greens. The taste is thin, the smell faintly bitter. That's the 109th mistake, cooking without balancing flavors. Medieval cooks, even in humble homes, paired ingredients to make the most of what they had: herbs, to cut fat grains, to stretch meat onions with broth, to soften their sharpness. You've made a pot of little more than hot water. After eating, you decide to work on your tools. You take your knife to the whetstone, but rush the process, running it back and forth without steady angle or pressure. That's the 110th mistake, sharpening without skill. Medieval tool sharpening was a practiced craft, each stroke deliberate. Your blade ends up with an uneven edge that still tears more than it cuts. You try to carve a simple handle for your axe, thinking it will improve the wobble. You fit it into place, but it sits loose no matter how you wedge it. That's the 111th mistake, repairing without proper joinery. Medieval woodworkers shaped handles to fit the tool, exactly swelling them with moisture or resin. Your axe will still twist in your grip, dangerous with every swing. By mid-afternoon, you feel restless. You decide to scout for better hunting grounds. You cross the meadow, following a deer path into the trees. Soon you're deep in the forest without noting your route. That's the 112th mistake, losing track of bearings. Medieval hunters carried the landscape in their minds, noting every landmark and shadow. You wander until the trees thin and you realize you've looped back far from where you intended. The detour costs you precious daylight. You rush back, hoping to gather kindling before dark. You snatch sticks from the damp forest floor, stuffing them into your arms. That's the 113th mistake, collecting wet wood in haste. Medieval gatherers sought fallen branches off the ground, caught in low branches, or wedged in bushes, their dryness preserved by air. You'll be coaxing flame from stubborn smoking fuel tonight. Back at the hut, you try to light the fire early, but the damp logs resist. You blow, shift, poke, until finally a weak flame takes. That's the 114th mistake, spending energy on fire making at the wrong time of day. Medieval fires were sustained through the night and stoked in the morning, avoiding the daily battle of coaxing flame from scratch. You collapse by the hearth, the small victory feeling hollow. Night falls clear and cold. You sit in the firelight tools scattered nearby, the smell of smoke heavy in the air. Somewhere in the dark, an owl calls again, the sound soft but pointed. You lie back on your straw bed, the ceiling beams dark above you. The valley waits patient as always, measuring you not by intentions, but by the slow weight of your mistakes. And tomorrow you'll step out into that same light, thinking once more that you can outpace them. Dawn comes late today, the light reluctant to spill into the hut. The air is still carrying that muffled quiet that sometimes follows a night of deep frost. You push yourself up and feel the stiffness in your shoulders from yesterday's wood hauling. The fire is out again, just cold ash in the hearth. That's the 115th mistake, letting the hearth go cold in the heart of the cold season. Medieval households kept a small ember banked under ash through the night, so morning warmth was a matter of coaxing, not reigniting. You will now spend the better part of an hour wrestling smoke from damp wood. You decide to step outside first, hoping the sun might already have warmed the meadow. Your boots crunch faintly in the frost, and the air nips at your nose. The frost glitters, making the meadow beautiful. But that's the 116th mistake, taking too long to admire beauty when survival still waits. In medieval life, frost mornings were cues for urgent work, breaking ice on troughs, checking food stores, making sure livestock hadn't chilled overnight. You linger until your fingers ache from the cold. You head for the stream to break the thin ice crust. As you stoop to fill your water skin, you notice your reflection, red-cheeked eyes still heavy. You splash cold water on your face to wake yourself. That's the 117th mistake, shocking the body with icy water before it's warmed by movement. Medieval folk washed hands and faces in cool, not freezing water, early in the day, knowing the body's strength was needed for morning labor. You shiver all the way back to the hut. With no fire yet, you decide to check your snares, hoping at least for breakfast. The first two are empty. The third collapsed entirely under the weight of fallen branches. That's the 118th mistake, placing traps where debris collects. Medieval trappers rid the forest for danger to their own tools, dead branches overhead, shifting snow, heavy leaf fall. You'll need to rebuild them in clearer spots. Frustration pushes you to hunt instead. You spot a small herd of deer grazing at the edge of the meadow. You crouch low, creeping forward, but the wind is at your back. That's the 119th mistake, hunting upwind. Medieval hunters planned their approach downwind, so the scent carried away from the prey. You're made before you've taken 5 steps, and the herd melts into the trees. You return empty-handed to the hut, and finally manage to get the fire going, though it smokes more than it burns. You sit near it, trying to warm your hands, and decide to cook the last of your grain with water. That's the 120th mistake, using the last of a staple without a plan to replace it. In medieval life, the larder was managed like a ledger. You never emptied it without knowing when the next store would arrive. You'll now face days without even the comfort of porridge. By midday, you decide to gather wood again, though the forest feels heavier under the winter light. You find a cluster of fallen branches and haul them back in a bundle tied with rope. The rope frays and snaps halfway home. That's the 121st mistake, trusting old rope. Medieval workers inspected cordage, regularly retwisting or replacing strands before heavy work. You spill half your load in the snow and have to make 2 more trips. Back at the hut, you see smoke rising from your fire, but it's thin, the kind that tells you the wood is burning fast without lasting heat. That's the 122nd mistake, feeding fire with only small branches. Medieval hearths, mixed sizes, thin sticks, to catch flame, thicker logs for steady burn. You're warming your face for moments at a time before the heat dies again. Restless, you decide to fix the sagging reed roof once more. You climb up, careful on the ladder, but begin working without clearing the frost. That's the 123rd mistake, repairing in unsafe conditions. Medieval roofers waited for dry mornings or used planks for secure footing. You slip twice, catching yourself on the ridge, your heart thudding hard. You tie the bundles tighter this time, but your knots are hasty, your fingers numb. That's the 124th mistake, speed over precision. In medieval repairs, the time spent tying secure knots meant seasons of safety. You'll be back up here soon when the wind shakes these loose. By late afternoon, the cold has settled deeper. You try to gather herbs from the edge of the forest, thinking a tea might help warm you. You pull a few brittle stalks and drop them into your pouch without checking them closely. That's the 125th mistake, harvesting in haste. Medieval herbalists handled winter plants gently, stripping only what was useful, storing the rest carefully to preserve potency. You'll steep these tonight, only to find they've gone woody and tasteless. The sun lowers, and the forest darkens quickly in the cold season. You make for the hut before full dark, your breath puffing white in the air. You step inside and notice your bedding is damp again, a faint must in the straw. That's the 126th mistake, ignoring bedding through the winter. Medieval homes rotated and replaced straw more often in the cold months to prevent mold and the illnesses that followed. You simply push it into a flatter pile and drop your blanket over it. Dinner is little more than hot water with a pinch of those brittle herbs. You sip slowly, watching the fire dance low. Outside, the air is utterly still. Even the trees seem frozen in place. That's the 127th mistake, letting quiet trick you into safety. In medieval life, stillness often preceded change, a coming storm, a sudden drop in temperature. You settle in, thinking the night will pass uneventfully. When you finally lie down, the cold presses close. You wrap the blanket tighter, breathing into your hands. Somewhere outside, an animal moves soft, deliberate steps in the snow. You close your eyes, knowing that while you sleep, the valley continues its silent measure of you, counting your mistakes in ways you may not discover until it's far too late. The night was cold enough that you wake with your breath puffing in little clouds above you. The fire is no more than gray dust, and your fingers are stiff before you've even sat up. You push the blanket aside and stand your toes, protesting against the chill of the earth beneath the straw. That's the 128th mistake, going to bed without banking the fire. In medieval homes, even the humblest hearth was kept alive through the night. Embers nestled under ash so the morning flame could be coaxed to life in minutes. You're starting over from nothing again, with smoke in your eyes and frozen hands. You decide to start the day with water from the stream. The path is slick, frosted in places where the sun hasn't yet reached. You make the short walk without caution, and that's the 129th mistake, forgetting that every injury costs you twice in winter. Medieval people understood that a twisted ankle in the cold months meant more than pain. It meant lost work, fewer supplies gathered, and less wood cut. Your luck holds this time, but the ice waits for your first careless step. The water skin fills slowly, the ice breaking into thin plates that clink against the leather sides. You drink the cold sliding down into your chest. It's bracing, but that's the 130th mistake, taking cold water on an empty stomach before work. Medieval villagers often warmed their drink or ate before sipping, knowing that a warm body worked longer and with more focus. You return to the hut with shivers riding your spine. You mean to check your traps, but the cold makes you think first of breakfast. The cupboard holds only a small pouch of grain, and you pour it into the pot without hesitation. That's the 131st mistake, spending the last of anything without a plan for tomorrow. In medieval kitchens, grain was portioned carefully, each measure stretched with other ingredients to carry a family through the lean months. You will now face the same hunger tomorrow morning as you do today. While the pot simmers, you decide to patch the hole in your wall where damp has crept in. You gather planks and begin to fit them together, but you don't bother to strip the rotted wood beneath. That's the 132nd mistake, building over weakness. Medieval carpenters cut away the damaged sections before replacing them, knowing that rot would spread unseen under the new work. You'll see the stain bleeding through again before long. After breakfast, you head into the forest for wood. The air is sharp and clear, the ground crunching faintly beneath your boots. You find a tall tree leaning toward the path and think it will be easy to fell. You swing without marking where it will land. That's the 133rd mistake, cutting without a safe zone. Medieval woodcutters cleared space before a single strike, making sure no branch could twist or kick back. When your tree falls, it brushes the edge of your coat too close for comfort. You cut the trunk into logs and begin to haul them back. Midway, you stop to rest, dropping them in a pile near the trail. That's the 134th mistake, leaving gathered goods unattended. In medieval villages, anything left unguarded might be claimed by someone else, scavenged by animals, or simply forgotten under snow. You'll be backtracking later to find them costing daylight. When you return to the hut, you notice the roof sagging again under the weight of frost. You climb up without clearing a stable path. That's the 135th mistake, working in winter without securing footing. Medieval builders laid boards or lashed ropes to steady themselves. You crouch on the slick surface, heart thudding at every shift beneath your boots. Your repairs hold for now, but the cold bites through your clothes faster than you expected. You think of returning inside, but decide instead to gather reeds at the riverbank. The water's edge is slick, and you cut the stems in bunches that fall into the shallows. That's the 136th mistake, working near icy water without care. In the medieval world, a slip here could mean soaked clothes and a chill that might never shake loose until fever set in. You pull the dripping reeds onto the bank and carry them home anyway. By mid-afternoon, the sky begins to pale in that particular winter way that warns of early nightfall. You decide to make a quick trip to the village for trade. You gather your reeds and a bundle of firewood, carrying them on your shoulders. That's the 137th mistake, overloading in cold weather. Medieval haulers paced their burdens to avoid sweating into clothes which could freeze against the skin later. Your shoulders burn your breath clouds in heavy bursts, and sweat cools along your spine before you reach the first house. The trader offers only a few coins for your goods. You buy a small wedge of cheese and a heel of bread, tucking them into your pouch. On the way back, you decide to take a shortcut through the forest. That's the 138th mistake, changing routes late in the day. Medieval travelers stuck to known paths when the light was fading. A wrong turn meant hours lost in the dark. You find yourself picking your way over roots and stones, the sky dimming too fast overhead. When you finally reach the hut, the cold has sharpened into evening frost. You set your small meal by the fire and eat slowly, each bite a comfort. You think about the logs still waiting in the forest and the rotted wall hidden under your new boards. That's the 139th mistake, counting tomorrow's work as already done. Medieval lives were measured by completed tasks, not intended ones. You may tell yourself you've solved the problem, but the valley keeps its own tally. The fire burns low. Outside, the frost glitters in the moonlight. You pull the blanket around your shoulders and stretch out on the straw, the day's small victories already fading into the long list of things left undone. The hut creaks softly, the cold pressing in through every gap, and you know the night will keep its quiet watch over both you and the weight of your unlearned lessons. The fire has burned out again. You sit up in the gray dawn, the air inside the hut colder than the breath you exhale. The straw beneath you feels damp in patches, and your blanket smells faintly of smoke and mildew. That's the 140th mistake, accepting the slow creep of damp as harmless. In medieval homes, wet bedding meant more than discomfort. It bred illness, stiffness in the joints, and days of lost work. You push it aside and stand the cold cutting straight through your clothes. You step outside into a hush, broken only by the faint groan of trees in the distance. Frost rims the edges of the meadow, catching what little light seeps from the low sky. You head to the stream for water, your boots crunching faintly with each step. At the bank, you crouch to fill your skin and find a thin film of ice across the surface. You break it without thinking. That's the 141st mistake, cracking ice with bare hands. Medieval folk used sticks or tools to keep hands dry, knowing how quickly wet skin stiffened in winter air. You stand fingers numb before you've taken the first sip. Hunger pulls you toward your traps again. You trudge through the meadow, each step a soft crunch. The first snare is sagged, the second missing, entirely likely taken by an animal or lost under the snow's crust. That's the 142nd mistake, setting traps where snow and predators can both claim them. Medieval trappers guarded their investment by building small covers or placing traps under low branches to keep them hidden and dry. You turn back toward the hut with nothing in hand. Inside, you take stock of your supplies, a few sticks of wood, the wedge of cheese you saved from yesterday, and little else. You cut the cheese into slivers, trying to make it feel like more. That's the 143rd mistake, eating in token amounts without actual nourishment. In medieval households, meals were planned to sustain a body through long hours. A tiny bite now is just a slower road to weakness. Still restless, you head into the forest for firewood. The ground under the trees is softer here, the frost thinner. You spot a fallen branch and bend to pick it up, ignoring the tangle of brambles around it. That's the 144th mistake, grabbing without clearing the way. Medieval gatherers cut back snags before reaching in, preventing scratches that could fester in winter. You come away with a small cut across your knuckles, stinging in the cold. You haul the wood back and drop it by the hut wall again, too close to the timbers. That's the 145th mistake, repeating placement habits you know are wrong. Medieval homes kept firewood sheltered, but never leaning against living spaces to prevent dampness and pests from moving inward. Your habit ensures you'll invite both inside before the season is out. By midday, the cold feels sharper. You decide to work indoors, mending a small tear in your cloak. You thread a bone needle clumsily, the point catching in the fabric. That's the 146th mistake, repairing clothing without proper tools or light. Medieval tailors worked near windows in daylight or by a strong hearth glow. You stitch in the gloom, producing a crooked seam that will fray again quickly. After a while, you decide to stretch your legs. You wander toward the edge of the meadow and spot deer tracks in the thin snow. You follow them eagerly, your steps loud in the brittle grass. That's the 147th mistake, tracking without silence. Medieval hunters moved as though the earth might notice, slow, deliberate, each step placed where leaves and twigs wouldn't snap. You flush the deer long before you're close enough for a shot. Frustrated, you turn toward the stream again. Along the bank, you notice reeds poking through the frost. You pull them out in clumps, bending and snapping them without care. That's the 148th mistake, harvesting in winter without leaving the root. Medieval gatherers knew to cut above the root crown so plants could regrow in spring. Your method ensures bare patches that will not return next season. You carry the reeds home, dropping some along the way when your grip slips. That's the 149th mistake, overloading your arms without binding the load. Medieval haulers tied bundles for balance and grip. You arrive with fewer reeds than you cut, leaving a trail for anyone to follow, animal or human. Back at the hut, you try to weave a small mat to keep your bedding off the damp floor. Your fingers are clumsy, the reeds uneven. That's the 150th mistake, working with poorly prepared materials. Medieval weaving began with trimmed, sorted, and soaked fibers so they bent evenly. Yours crack and split under the pressure of your weaving. As the light fades, you decide to check the sky. A thin band of clouds slides in from the west, the color of tarnished silver. You stand watching it longer than you should. That's the 151st mistake, observing signs without acting on them. Medieval farmers read the sky as instruction. A shift in wind meant moving grain indoors, covering wood, securing animals. You turn away, leaving your gear scattered outside. By nightfall, the fire burns weakly again. You huddle near it, gnawing on the last sliver of cheese. The wind has picked up, rattling the loose boards in the wall. You tell yourself you'll tighten them tomorrow. That's the 152nd mistake, assuming tomorrow will offer better conditions. Medieval work was dictated by weather, but they knew the best moment to act was often the one they were standing in. You lie down on your straw bed, the half-woven mat beneath you, scratching faintly. Outside, the wind's whistle deepens, and the valley folds itself into the darkness. You close your eyes, knowing that tonight, as always, the land measures your days, not by what you hope to do, but by what you left undone. The wind from last night never truly stopped. It sighs through the gaps in your hut, bringing with it a thin, sharp cold that finds your skin no matter how you wrap yourself. You rise slowly, each movement dragging against the stiffness in your muscles. The fire is stone cold, only a faint dusting of ash left to stir. That's the 153rd mistake, letting the wind rob your heat without protecting the hearth. In medieval homes, hearths were shielded with stones, boards, or even stacked turf to block drafts. You've left yours open, and the night has taken every bit of warmth you had stored. Outside, the sky is a brittle blue, the kind that promises nothing but clear, biting air. Your breath hangs like pale smoke as you head toward the woodpile. You grab the first logs you see, damp, cold to the touch. That's the 154th mistake, starting the day with poor fuel. Medieval families chose their driest wood for morning fires, so warmth returned quickly. You'll now waste half the morning just convincing your wood to burn. You strike flint and coax a reluctant flame to life, the smoke curling low before it rises. While it struggles, you decide to fetch water. The path to the stream is half frozen, your boots slipping now and then. At the bank, you notice chunks of ice drifting lazily along. You break a thin sheet to scoop water, but the edges slice at your fingers. That's the 155th mistake handling ice without care. In medieval winters, even small cuts could fester. Cold slowed healing, and dirt in the wound could linger until spring brought infection. You return with the water, and the fire has caught at last. You warm your hands, but you know it won't last if you don't feed it. You add more damp wood, and the flames sulk. That's the 156th mistake, choking a fire with unseasoned fuel. Medieval hearthkeepers layered dry splinters, twigs, and only then thicker logs. You've buried the embers under weight they can't manage. With the fire fussing, you decide to check your traps. The snow crunches under your steps louder than you'd like. The first snare is buried beneath a small drift. The second is gone entirely. That's the 157th mistake, placing traps without considering snowdrift patterns. Medieval trappers read the land's contours, placing snares where snow wouldn't collect. You kneel to dig the first one out, hands stiff from the cold. When you return empty-handed, you decide to hunt along the forest edge. You spot a hare darting between roots and raise your bow. Your breath comes too fast, fogging your sightline. That's the 158th mistake, shooting without steady breath. Medieval hunters slowed themselves until breath and heartbeat fell into a rhythm, only loosing when the body was still. Your arrow skims past, and the hare vanishes into the undergrowth. Frustrated, you return to the hut and think about mending the door, which rattled badly in last night's wind. You take the door off its hinges to plane the edges, but you work too fast, slicing away more than you mean to. That's the 159th mistake, overcutting repairs. Medieval carpenters worked slowly, testing the fit between every adjustment. Now the door hangs crooked, letting in more air than before. You stuff rags in the gap, but they sag loose almost immediately. That's the 160th mistake, using makeshift fixes where real work is needed. Medieval repairs were meant to last. Even a temporary patch was sturdy enough to carry a household through weeks, not hours. You'll be resetting the rags before nightfall. By midday, you decide to take advantage of the sun's brightness to gather reeds. You find a patch near the frozen riverbank and begin cutting, but you leave the outer stalks in a tangle. That's the 161st mistake, harvesting without clearing your work area. Medieval gatherers worked in clean, open spaces to avoid losing good stalks in the mess. You trip twice on the stems you've left behind. You bundle the reeds loosely and sling them over your shoulder. Halfway back, the wind catches and scatters them. That's the 162nd mistake, failing to bind materials properly. Medieval workers tied loads tight, especially in open areas where wind could undo hours of labor. You spend 20 minutes chasing stray stalks across the snow. By the time you reach the hut, the light is already beginning to tilt toward afternoon. You try to set the reeds near the wall for weaving later, but they lean awkwardly and fall. That's the 163rd mistake, stacking vertically in unstable piles. Medieval storage relied on horizontal bundles, weight spread evenly to avoid collapse. You leave them where they lie, promising to fix it later. The fire has gone low again, and you try to revive it with damp sticks. The smoke thickens and your eyes water. That's the 164th mistake, venting a hut poorly. Medieval homes had small vents or smoke holes to keep air moving. You sit coughing in a haze until the draft shifts and pulls the smoke upward. As the day fades, you take stock of your supplies. Little woodless food, and now an even leakier door. You decide to eat what remains of your bread with a bit of onion you've been saving. The onion is soft, its sharp scent dulled. That's the 165th mistake, keeping fresh food too long without preserving it. Medieval kitchens pickled salted or dried onions to keep them through winter. You swallow it anyway, chewing past the bitterness. Evening brings a brittle stillness. You tuck yourself under the blanket, the wind fingering through the gaps in the door and roof. You stare at the ceiling's beams dark against the dim firelight, and think about all the small things you didn't finish today. That's the 166th mistake, believing small, unfinished tasks don't add up. In medieval survival, they were the weight that bent a year toward hardship. Outside the valley lies silent under a thin crust of frost. It waits as it always does, not rushing you, not warning you, just letting your mistakes count themselves in the slow language of winter. The frost is heavier this morning, a fine white crust on every surface that crunches under your boots when you step outside. Your breath hangs in the still air, and the quiet is so deep, it feels like the valley is holding its breath. You pull your cloak tighter, glancing at the sun, struggling to lift itself over the low hills. You tell yourself you'll start with small chores today. That's the 167th mistake, believing small tasks can be delayed without consequence. In medieval life, little chores were the threads that held survival together. Neglecting them frayed the whole cloth. You notice the woodpile is low again. You head into the forest, your axe on your shoulder. You find a fallen tree, but strike at it from the wrong side, the trunk shifting unpredictably as you work. That's the 168th mistake, cutting without reading the lay of the log. Medieval woodcutters studied the grain, the weight, the lean before a single blow. You end up fighting the wood instead of guiding it. The log splits awkwardly, leaving jagged edges that will make stacking harder. You haul what you can back toward the hut, dropping pieces once or twice when your arms tire. That's the 169th mistake, overloading yourself in cold air. In medieval winters, even strongbacks respected the danger of oversweating. Damp clothes could stiffen into ice before you reached home. Your shirt clings to you now, cooling too quickly. Back at the hut, you dump the wood against the wall again, out of habit. That's the 170th mistake, continuing bad storage patterns even after knowing their risks. In medieval yards, firewood was stored just far enough away to keep pests and damp out of the living space. You've set yourself up for another round of beetles in the straw by spring. You decide to warm yourself with movement, so you head to the stream for water. The ice here is thicker than yesterday. You try to break it with the butt of your axe, but the blow sends a spray of shards into your face. That's the 171st mistake, striking ice without shielding your eyes. In medieval winters, people worked behind hoods, visors, or simply turned their heads aside, knowing that ice chips could blind. You blink away the sting cheeks, wet from the melt. You fill your skin and head back thinking about food. You've nothing fresh, so you decide to make a thin soup from the dried greens you gathered weeks ago. You drop them into boiling water, but the taste is as bitter as chewing on dry bark. That's the 172nd mistake, storing greens too close to heat. Medieval households hung herbs in cool lofts or airy sheds. Yours sat near the hearth until their flavor burned away. After choking down a few mouthfuls, you decide to check your traps. The snow is deeper here, clinging to your boots and slowing your steps. You find the first snare collapsed under the weight of snow, the second chewed clean through where an animal escaped. That's the 173rd mistake, using cord too light for hungry prey. Medieval trappers reinforced winter snares with stronger rope or wire, anticipating the struggles of larger animals. You head home with empty hands. Frustration tempts you into trying a quick hunt. You spot a pheasant in the distance, its plumage catching the pale light. You ready your bow, but step onto a crust of snow that cracks loudly. The bird bursts upward before you've even drawn. That's the 174th mistake, closing distance without minding the sound of your own movement. Medieval hunters stepped where snow lay soft, broken by brush or grass, masking their approach. The cold gnaws at you now, so you return to the hut. Inside, you decide to patch the draft under the door with moss you gathered earlier in the season. You pack it into the gap loosely, leaving clumps sticking out. That's the 175th mistake, insulating without sealing. Medieval builders wedged moss tight, sometimes daubing it with mud or resin to keep it in place. Yours will blow out with the first hard wind. You turn next to your cloak, thinking you'll add another patch where the fabric has thinned. You cut a square from an old sack and sew it over the weak spot. That's the 176th mistake, using material that's too coarse for wear. Medieval repairers matched patch to garment as closely as possible. Rough cloth chafed and wore down the garment faster. Your repair will be a new weak point within days. By mid-afternoon, the sky has clouded over, muting what little light there was. You decide to gather reeds for weaving, but the banks are slick and rimmed with frost. You lean out too far for a tall stalk, nearly losing your balance. That's the 177th mistake, reaching without securing footing. Medieval gatherers often worked in pairs along icy water, one steadying while the other cut. Alone, you sway precariously until you lurch back to safety. You manage a small bundle and tie it loosely. On the walk home, the knot slips, scattering stalks behind you. That's the 178th mistake, tying for speed instead of for hold. Medieval bundlers used layered wraps, each loop holding the next. You'll lose more than you keep this way. As evening comes, you light the fire and sit near it, but your thoughts turn again to food. You remember a buried cache of root vegetables you dug earlier in the year. You fetch them from outside, but they're soft and sprouting. That's the 179th mistake, storing roots without enough insulation. Medieval cellars and pits were lined with straw leaves or sand to keep frost out and moisture balanced. You left yours in bare soil. You eat a small portion anyway, the rest too far gone. The fire crackles low, and the wind picks up outside, brushing against the hut like a restless hand. You pull the blanket over your shoulders, knowing the night will press colder than the last. That's the 180th mistake, assuming the season will soften before it has reason to. Medieval wisdom said winter always took what it was owed before letting go. You lie down, the sound of the wind a constant thread through the hut. Sleep comes slowly, every creak and whistle reminding you that tomorrow's mistakes are already waiting for their turn. The wind has dropped by morning, leaving the world in a brittle, echoing silence. The frost is so thick it looks like the meadow has been dusted with flour. Your breath rises in small clouds as you step outside, boots crunching through the crust. The cold feels sharper today, the kind that settles into your bones before you've even begun work. You think perhaps you'll start with a bit of tidying indoors. That's the 181st mistake, choosing the smallest task when the largest ones can't wait. In medieval life, morning light was gold. It was spent on heavy work while the body was still fresh. You'll waste it sweeping straw while the real needs wait in the cold. You push the straw into neater piles, shaking out the damp edges. The smell is faintly sour from days of use. You tell yourself you'll replace it soon, but not now. That's the 182nd mistake, postponing bedding changes until later. Medieval homes refreshed straw, often especially in cold months, to keep pests down and warmth up. Each day you wait adds a little more discomfort to every night. After sweeping, you step outside to check the woodpile low again. You grab your axe and head for the forest. You find a suitable tree, but your hands are stiff on the haft grip, less sure than it should be. That's the 183rd mistake, working with cold hands. Medieval woodcutters warmed their fingers before gripping tools, knowing a weak hold could twist a swing or invite injury. You take the first cut awkwardly, feeling the jar all the way into your elbows. The tree falls at last, but you've cut it too short, leaving a stump higher than your knee. That's the 184th mistake, wasting usable wood. Medieval woodworkers cut close to the ground to take every inch of good timber. You've left a post tall enough to mock you each time you pass. You trim and haul the logs back, breathing hard in the cold air. As usual, you stack them against the hut wall. That's the 185th mistake, repeating known errors without correction. In medieval yards, mistakes were lessons. To repeat them was to invite slow disaster. The beetles you're encouraging now will be chewing quietly at your timbers by the first thaw. Next, you head to the stream for water. The ice is thick today, almost resisting the axe. You strike until you open a jagged hole and dip your skin into the black water beneath. A shard scrapes your knuckle. That's the 186th mistake, working barehanded with ice and tools together. Medieval practice was to protect the skin with wraps or gloves before approaching frozen water. You hiss at the sting, already imagining it swelling by nightfall. Back at the hut, you decide to make a simple stew with the last of your dried mushrooms and a few withered herbs. You toss them into the pot without soaking them first. That's the 187th mistake, skipping preparation steps to save time. Medieval cooks soaked and softened dried foods so they could yield flavor and nutrition. Yours bob like little knots of bark in the boiling water. While it cooks, you set out to check your traps again. The snow lies in deceptive layers, soft over hard, and each step crunches loud enough to announce you. That's the 188th mistake, moving through snow without reading its crust. Medieval hunters learned to find the quiet line where snow gave way underfoot without cracking. You approach the first trap with enough noise to scatter anything still breathing. The traps are empty. You crouch and adjust one half-heartedly, then stand again, muttering to yourself. That's the 189th mistake, making adjustments without real care. Medieval trappers set each snare as though it would be the one that kept them alive. Loose loops and weak stakes meant wasted days. By mid-afternoon, clouds have rolled in and the air tastes faintly of snow. You decide to gather reeds while you still can. You lean over the frosted bank and pull a handful free, breaking them unevenly in your rush. That's the 190th mistake, cutting materials without uniformity. Medieval weavers prized even lengths for tighter, stronger work. You'll fight with these later when you try to weave them into anything useful. You tie the bundle with a slip knot, and halfway home it unravels. That's the 191st mistake, securing a load with a knot, meant for speed, not endurance. Medieval workers tied for the journey, not the moment. You gather what you can from the snow, but some stalks are already buried by the wind. When you finally reach the hut, the stew smells faintly better than you expected, though it's thin as rainwater. You eat slowly, letting the warmth spread down into your belly. Outside, the first flakes of snow are drifting past the window. That's the 192nd mistake, ignoring the early signs of a storm. Medieval households saw the first flakes as a warning to secure tools, bring in wood, and prepare lamps. You stay seated, telling yourself you'll deal with it in a while. By evening, the snow has deepened enough to hide the trail to the forest. The wind carries it sideways across the meadow, piling it against the hut. You stand at the door for a while, watching the white swirl into every gap and corner. That's the 193rd mistake, standing still while the storm builds. Medieval survival meant working quickly between gusts, shoring up defenses, before the weather sealed the world in white. When darkness falls, the wind has found its way through every gap in your walls and under the door. You pile extra logs on the fire and huddle close, feeling the heat on your face while your back stays cold. That's the 194th mistake, relying on direct heat instead of whole space warmth. Medieval homes were insulated as much as they were heated, layered fabrics, packed earth-sealed shutters. Without that, your fire is just a bright spot in a sea of cold. You stretch out under your blanket, the wind moaning in the eaves, the snow hissing softly against the outer walls. Somewhere beyond the white curtain of the storm, the valley holds steady, its patience undisturbed by your slow lessons. And as sleep begins to pull you down, you realize the season will keep teaching you whether you are ready to learn or not. The snow keeps falling in your dreams, not hurried, not heavy, just a slow, endless drift that wraps the valley in silence. The wind outside your hut softens, fading to little more than a sigh through the reeds. The fire's glow rests against the walls, steady but low, its warmth reaching you in quiet pulses. You lie still, the blanket pulled high, feeling the faint rise and fall of your own breath. In the deep quiet, time no longer seems to move. The work of the day, the gathering and cutting, the tying and mending, slips further away with each slow inhale. Out there, the traps sit under snow, the woodpile waits against the wall, and the meadow lies unbroken except for the faint print of your boots. But none of it calls for you now. The valley can wait until morning. You let your thoughts drift like the snow outside, each one landing softly before melting into stillness. The weight of the blanket holds you gently in place like a hand at your shoulder. You feel the heat of the fire at your cheek, the cool air just beyond it, and the easy rhythm between the two. Somewhere in the dark, beyond the meadow, the forest watches as it always does, without judgment, without hurry. And here, inside your small shelter, the night folds itself around you, as if it has always known your name. The lessons, the mistakes, the long days, they're all threads in the same quiet fabric. You have done enough. So you breathe in once more, deep and slow, and let the air out without thought. The snow falls, the fire hums, the valley sleeps.